Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will uncover hidden wisdom that enlightened masters have treasured for over 1,000 years to heal the soul and discover the profound rest that lives beneath all struggle. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share with you a collection of healing Zen stories that contain the lost secrets of inner freedom and unshakable peace. Each ancient tale holds a powerful insight that can completely transform how you experience difficult emotions, overthinking, and the endless hunger for something more. These aren't just stories to fall asleep to. They're carefully guarded teachings from masters who discovered something most of the world has forgotten, that true tranquility isn't achieved by controlling our circumstances, but by understanding our deepest nature. As we move through these remarkable teachings, you'll feel something profound begin to unfold. The weight of your worries will start to lift. The relentless stream of thoughts will naturally begin to slow. You'll find yourself gently dropping into a state of deep clarity and restful awareness. So allow yourself to settle completely now. Let your body melt into whatever holds you. Take one mindful breath with me, and as you release it, know that you're about to receive ancient wisdom that has been patiently waiting for this very moment. Let us explore a story about the illusion of seeking what we already possess. In the mountains of ancient China, Master Yunmen lived in a simple monastery where the winter winds would whistle through cracks in the wooden walls. His robes, patched countless times, bore witness to years of devoted practice. One particularly cold morning, as frost painted delicate patterns on the temple windows, a wealthy merchant arrived at the monastery gates. The merchant stepped from his ornate carriage, wearing robes of the finest silk, lined with fox fur that gleamed in the morning light. His jewelry caught the sun as he approached the meditation hall, where Master Yunmen sat in quiet contemplation. The merchant's footsteps echoed importantly across the stone floor as he bowed deeply before the master. "Honored teacher," the merchant began, his voice carrying the confidence of one accustomed to purchasing solutions. "I have traveled far seeking the Dharma. My coffers are full, and I can offer great donations to support your temple. Please, share with me the wisdom I seek to buy." Master Yunmen looked down at his own threadbare robes, then gazed steadily at the merchant's elaborate finery. The contrast was striking. Wealth displayed against simplicity, acquisition facing contentment. Without speaking, the master reached for a pair of small scissors that lay nearby and, in one deliberate motion, cut a large hole directly through his own sleeve. The merchant gasped in shock. "Master, your robe is completely ruined. How could you destroy your clothing?" "Indeed it is torn," Yunmen replied calmly, examining the ragged hole and pulling the fabric wider still. "Now it perfectly matches my understanding." The merchant's confusion deepened. "But how can damaged robes represent spiritual understanding? This makes no sense to me." Master Yunmen smiled with infinite gentleness. "My friend, you arrive here wrapped in layers of wealth and status, hoping to purchase wisdom as easily as you would buy cloth in the marketplace. But observe this carefully." He held up the torn sleeve so the light streamed through the opening. "This hole was always present in the fabric. I simply made visible what was already there. Your Buddha nature too has always been perfect and complete, requiring nothing, lacking nothing. No amount of money can purchase what you already possess in full measure, and no poverty can diminish or take away what is eternally yours. The merchant stared at the hole in the master's robe, and in that moment of seeing, something shifted in his understanding. His elaborate coverings suddenly felt heavy and unnecessary, hiding nothing but the same emptiness that showed through Yunmen's torn sleeve. The Buddha once said, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This ancient wisdom illuminates the fundamental paradox of spiritual seeking. We spend our lives trying to acquire, achieve, or attain what we imagine we lack, while the very thing we seek has never been absent from our experience. Why do we fall into this trap of seeking externally for what exists within? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned belief in scarcity and inadequacy. From childhood, we absorb the message that we are incomplete, that happiness and peace must be earned through accomplishment, purchased through acquisition, or validated through others' approval. This creates what Zen calls hungry ghost mentality, the endless appetite that can never be satisfied because we're looking in the wrong direction. The merchant's silk robes represent all the external layers we wrap around ourselves, hoping to feel complete. Perhaps for you, it's the perfect job that will finally bring security, the ideal relationship that will end loneliness, the spiritual experience that will confirm your worthiness, or the achievement that will prove your value. Like the merchant's finery, these pursuits aren't inherently wrong, but they become obstacles when we mistake them for the source of our wholeness. Master Yunmen's deliberate tearing reveals profound teaching about the nature of perfection. In Zen understanding, true perfection isn't flawless appearance, but authentic presence. The hole in the robe doesn't diminish its capacity to provide warmth or protection. If anything, it makes the garment more honest about its nature. Similarly, our perceived flaws, mistakes, and inadequacies don't diminish our Buddha nature. They simply make visible what was always true, that perfection includes imperfection, that wholeness encompasses brokenness. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This isn't contradiction, but recognition of our dual nature. On the absolute level, our essential being lacks nothing and needs no enhancement. On the relative level, we continue growing, learning, and healing throughout our lives. Both perspectives are true simultaneously. Consider how often throughout your day you operate from the assumption of inadequacy. Notice the internal voice that whispers, if only I were smarter, more attractive, more successful, more spiritual, then I would be worthy of love and peace." This voice keeps us perpetually seeking outside ourselves for what can only be recognized within. The Buddha taught, "What you seek is seeking you." The peace, wisdom, and love we long for are not destinations to reach, but the very ground of our being to recognize. Like the hole that was always in Yunmen's fabric, our Buddha nature has never been absent, only overlooked beneath layers of conditioning and seeking. Tonight, as you rest in this moment, can you sense the completeness that exists beneath your stories of inadequacy? Can you feel the peace that doesn't depend on your circumstances? The love that doesn't require external validation? the wisdom that needs no degrees or credentials. As the Buddha said, "Look within, you are the Buddha." Our next story reveals how authenticity emerges when we stop trying to be holy. In the ancient capital of Kyoto, Master Ikkyu walked the bustling streets where merchants hawked their wares and children played in dusty alleyways. The city hummed with life, ordinary, messy, and beautifully human. As he strolled past a group of stern-faced monks engaged in heated theological debate, their voices carried across the marketplace. "The truly dedicated practitioner eats only once daily," declared one monk, adjusting his perfectly arranged robes. "Twice daily eating shows attachment to pleasure and lack of discipline." "Furthermore," added another, stroking his beard importantly, "gazing upon flowers distracts the mind from proper meditation. We must guard against such worldly temptations if we wish to achieve enlightenment." The monks nodded seriously at each other, their discussion growing more intense as they passed the finest details of monastic behavior. Master Ikkyu listened briefly to their scholarly arguments, then, without comment, walked directly into a nearby tavern. The establishment was filled with farmers still covered in mud from their rice fields, their faces weathered by sun and honest labor. The group of monks, horrified by what they witnessed, rushed after him into the tavern. "Master Ikkyu," they called out in shock, "how can you enter such a place? We are monks. This behavior is completely inappropriate for someone of your standing." Ikkyu had already seated himself at a wooden table among the farmers, sharing rice wine and listening to their stories of the day's work in the fields. He looked up at the scandalized monks with eyes twinkling with gentle mischief. "You speak truly," he replied. "You are indeed monks. However, I forgot to be one this morning." "But master," one monk protested, his voice tight with concern, "what about your sacred vows? What about your reputation in the community? People look up to you as a spiritual example." Ikkyu raised his simple clay cup in a toast. "My vow is to wake up moment by moment. As for my reputation, it sleeps quite soundly without my constant attention." He turned back to the farmers surrounding him. "These men understand when rice is ready for harvest, simply by observing the color and weight of the grain. They know rain is coming by subtle changes in the air that city dwellers miss entirely. They recognize the Buddha in the mud caked under their fingernails, in the ache of muscles after honest work, in the satisfaction of feeding others through their labor. Tell me, what profound truths do you know?" The monks stood speechless, their carefully constructed arguments suddenly seeming hollow in the face of Ikkyu's simple presence among the farmers. The master continued his conversation about the wisdom found in understanding seasons, the generosity of earth, and the deep satisfaction that comes from work that serves life itself. Later that evening, as they walked back toward the monastery, one young monk approached Ikkyu hesitantly. "Master, were you teaching us something important back there in the tavern?" Ikkyu's response was gentle but direct. "Only if you were learning something. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The deeper teaching here shows us that authenticity carries more spiritual power than any performance of holiness. Why do we so easily fall into the trap of spiritual perfectionism? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that create this tendency. First is our attachment to identity and image. We become invested in being seen as good practitioners, wise teachers, or evolved individuals. This attachment to spiritual identity can become as binding as any worldly ego, perhaps more so because it disguises itself as virtue. Second is our confusion between form and essence. The external forms of spiritual practice, meditation postures, dietary restrictions, behavioral codes, are meant to support inner transformation. But we often reverse this relationship, believing that perfect adherence to form automatically produces spiritual insight. This leads to what Zen calls spiritual materialism, collecting practices, achievements, and recognitions while missing the point entirely. Third is our tendency to compartmentalize life into sacred and mundane categories. We imagine that enlightenment exists only in meditation halls, temples, or retreat centers, while ordinary life represents spiritual failure or distraction. This dualistic thinking prevents us from recognizing the Buddha nature that permeates all experience equally. Master Ikkyu's "forgetting to be a monk" illustrates the freedom that comes from dropping spiritual pretense. His presence among the farmers wasn't rebellion against his training, but complete embodiment of it. He found more authentic Dharma in genuine connection with working people than in abstract theological debates about proper behavior. Consider your own relationship with spiritual identity. Do you sometimes catch yourself performing goodness rather than simply being present? Notice the subtle pride that can arise from meditation achievements, the judgment toward those who seem less committed to practice, or the anxiety about maintaining your image as a conscious person. These are signs that spiritual ego has crept into your practice. Zen master Charlotte Joko Beck taught, "Enlightenment is not something you achieve. It's the absence of something. All your life you have been going forward after something, pursuing some goal. Enlightenment is dropping all that." Ikkyu demonstrates this dropping beautifully. Instead of pursuing the goal of being a perfect monk, he simply responded authentically to each moment. The farmers in the story represent groundedness in immediate reality. They know things through direct experience, the readiness of rice, the approach of weather, the satisfaction of useful work. This embodied wisdom often carries more truth than elaborate philosophizing about enlightenment. The Buddha himself was called the awakened one, not the one who talks about awakening. The Buddha taught, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This invitation to direct knowing rather than second-hand belief is exactly what Ikkyu embodies in choosing farmer's wisdom over monastic theory. Tonight, as you settle into rest, can you let go of any spiritual performance you might be carrying? Can you forget to be holy and simply be present? What would it feel like to meet this moment without any agenda for self-improvement or spiritual achievement? As the Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Let us now turn to a story about finding ultimate truth in ordinary simplicity. High on Mount Kogami, Master Ryokan lived in a humble hut that barely sheltered him from wind and weather. The villagers below called him the Great Fool because his behavior seemed to contradict all conventional wisdom. When children begged for food, he would empty his own bowl to feed them, then walk hungry to the village to ask for his own sustenance. He spent hours composing poems on fallen leaves, watching with delight as the wind carried his verses into the forest where no human eyes would ever read them. On a bright spring morning, as cherry blossoms painted the mountainside pink and white, Ryokan knelt in his small garden plot behind the hut. His weathered hands moved gently through the soil, planting flower seeds with the same careful attention he brought to meditation. Each seed received a whispered blessing before being tucked into the earth and covered tenderly with dark soil. A scholarly priest, having heard stories of this eccentric hermit, climbed the mountain path to test whether Ryokan possessed any real wisdom. He arrived to find the master patting down soil around newly planted seeds, humming softly to himself like a child at play. "Master Ryokan," the priest announced importantly, adjusting his fine robes and striking a formal posture. "I have devoted 30 years of my life to studying the sacred sutras. I have memorized countless teachings and debated with the greatest minds of our time. Can you, in your simplicity, tell me the true meaning of existence?" Ryokan continued his planting, placing each seed with deliberate care. "I plant these seeds in hope," he said quietly, "but I cannot know which ones will take root and grow." The priest frowned with impatience. "That's hardly an answer to my profound question, old man. I'm asking about the deepest mysteries of life and death, not gardening techniques." "You ask about the nature of existence," Ryokan replied, still focused on his work. "But existence itself is not a question requiring an answer. It is like these seeds. It simply unfolds according to its own nature." He patted the soil gently around a planted seed. "Some will become beautiful flowers that bring joy to passers-by. Others will provide food for birds and insects. Still others will return to earth, enriching the soil for future growth. All perfect outcomes, all purposeless in the most wonderful way." The priest's frustration grew. "But surely there must be some ultimate truth, some final understanding that makes sense of everything. What is the deepest wisdom you have gained?" Ryokan smiled with infinite kindness and held out a single seed in his palm. "Plant this," he said simply. "But master, I don't have time for such mundane activities. I have important spiritual work to accomplish, texts to study, students to teach. I cannot waste my precious time on gardening." "Ah," said Ryokan, his eyes sparkling with gentle humor. "Then you have answered your own question perfectly. The ultimate truth you seek is that there is no ultimate truth more important than this seed resting in your hand right now." The priest left the mountain, convinced that Ryokan was indeed a fool, just as the villagers claimed. But years later, whenever complex philosophical problems arose in his studies, he would remember the feeling of that tiny seed in his palm. So small, so ordinary, yet containing infinite possibility. And mysteriously, those difficult questions would dissolve like morning mist, leaving only simple presence. As the Buddha observed, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. What emerges from this story is the profound truth that enlightenment is not a grand achievement, but a return to original simplicity. Why do we complicate the spiritual path with endless seeking and elaborate theories? Zen Buddhism points to our addiction to complexity and our fear of the ordinary. We imagine that profound wisdom must be difficult to understand, requiring years of study and sophisticated concepts. This intellectual pride keeps us searching for extraordinary experiences while overlooking the miracle of simple existence. The priest represents our educated mind that has learned to value abstract knowledge over direct experience. He has memorized teachings about awakening, but cannot recognize it in the immediate moment of planting seeds. This is the tragedy of spiritual materialism, accumulating information about enlightenment while missing the enlightenment that is always present in ordinary activities. Master Ryokan's great foolishness demonstrates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh, open awareness that meets each moment without preconceptions. Children possess this naturally, which is why they find wonder in simple things that adults dismiss as insignificant. Ryokan maintained this childlike wonder throughout his life, finding profound joy in activities others considered mundane. The seed in Ryokan's palm represents the present moment itself. Like a seed, each moment contains infinite potential but requires our attention and care to actualize that potential. When we're busy seeking future enlightenment or analyzing past experiences, we miss the creative power available right now. Consider how often you postpone happiness or peace until you achieve some imagined spiritual milestone. Perhaps you think, once I master meditation, then I'll be centered. Or, when I understand the teachings better, then I'll find peace. This future-oriented seeking keeps us from recognizing that the peace we seek is already present in the simple act of breathing, the ordinary miracle of awareness itself. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." Ryokan embodied this beginner's mind perfectly. Each seed he planted was a fresh encounter with mystery. Each poem written on leaves was complete in itself, needing no preservation or recognition to fulfill its purpose. The purposelessness Ryokan describes is not meaninglessness, but freedom from the tyranny of constant goal-seeking. When we can engage fully in activities for their own sake rather than for what they might produce, we discover a quality of presence that transforms the mundane into the sacred. Washing dishes becomes meditation, walking becomes prayer, planting seeds becomes communion with the creative force of existence. The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Ryokan lived this teaching through his generous simplicity, finding joy in giving away his poems to the wind, his food to hungry children, and his time to anyone who visited his humble hut. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, can you find the ultimate truth in some simple activity? Perhaps feeling the weight of your blanket, noticing your breath naturally slowing, or sensing the miracle of your body healing and regenerating as you sleep. What if the deepest wisdom you seek is already here, disguised as this ordinary moment? As the Buddha said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a profound teaching about the nature of our original mind. In a bustling temple where Master Bankei was giving a Dharma talk, the morning air was filled with the scent of incense and the quiet rustle of listeners settling into meditation posture. The gathered students, ranging from farmers to merchants to fellow monks, had come to hear about the unborn Buddha mind that Bankei taught with such clarity and power. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by loud shouting from the back of the hall. A Nichiren priest had entered with the obvious intention of disrupting the gathering, his voice cutting through the silence as he proclaimed his own teachings and denounced what he called Bankai's false Dharma. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some turning to look with irritation at the disruptor, others whispering among themselves about this rude interruption. Master Bankei, however, remained perfectly calm. His face showed no trace of anger or annoyance. Instead, he smiled warmly and addressed the shouting priest with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, my friend, for sharing your passionate teachings with us. Your dedication to the Dharma is clearly strong. Please come forward so everyone can hear you better. I welcome your voice in our discussion." The priest, who had been prepared for argument or dismissal, found himself caught completely off guard by this unexpected welcome. He approached the front of the hall suspiciously, certain that the Zen master was somehow mocking him or setting a trap. "You think you're clever, don't you?" the priest said defensively. "I see through your false courtesy. You're just trying to make me look foolish in front of these people." Bankai's expression remained kind and genuinely curious. "I can see that you feel strong anger toward me and my teaching. This passion clearly runs deep. But tell me, before you entered this hall and saw me sitting here, where was this anger you're experiencing?" The priest paused, momentarily confused by the question. It wasn't there, obviously. The anger came when I witnessed you misleading these sincere people with your incorrect understanding of Buddha's teaching. "I see," Bankai nodded with understanding. "And if you were to leave this place right now and never think of me or my teachings again, what would happen to this anger you're feeling?" The priest considered this carefully. "It would fade away, I suppose. If I never encountered you again, there would be no reason for the anger to continue." "Exactly so," Bankai said gently. "So this anger that feels so real and important to you right now is not your original nature. It arose when certain conditions came together, and it will disappear when those conditions change. But tell me, what was present in you before this anger appeared, and what will remain after it dissolves?" The priest stood quietly for a long moment, looking within himself with a quality of attention he rarely brought to his inner experience. I'm not sure what to call it. There's something there, but it's not easy to describe." "Perfect," Bankai smiled. "No need to name it or define it. This don't-know awareness that you're touching right now, this consciousness that was present before your anger arose and will remain when it passes. This is what I call the unborn Buddha mind. It's not something special you need to achieve through years of practice or study. You're functioning from it right now, even in the midst of our discussion." The priest's entire demeanor began to soften as he recognized something fundamental about his own awareness. The rigid anger that had driven him to disrupt the teaching was still present, but now it was held in a larger space of recognition. "This original mind," Bankei continued, "is unborn because it was never created, and it's undying because it can never be destroyed. It's not Buddhist or non-Buddhist, not sacred or ordinary. It's simply the aware presence that makes all experience possible. Right now, it's allowing you to hear my words, to feel whatever emotions are arising, to make sense of this moment. You don't need to understand it intellectually or achieve it through effort. You're already living from it perfectly. The priest bowed deeply, no longer an angry disruptor, but a fellow human being touched by recognition of his own deepest nature. The Buddha understood that hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. This ancient wisdom illuminates how Master Bankei met aggression with acceptance, transforming conflict into teaching through the power of recognition. Why do we so readily get caught in reactive patterns when challenged or attacked? Zen Buddhism explains that we habitually identify with our emotions and thoughts, mistaking temporary mental states for our permanent identity. When someone triggers anger in us, we think, "I am angry," rather than recognizing anger is arising in awareness. This subtle difference has profound implications for how we respond to conflict. Bankei's approach demonstrates what Zen calls original mind, the awareness that exists prior to all our emotional reactions and mental commentaries. This isn't a state we need to achieve, but our most fundamental nature that we can learn to recognize and trust. Like the sky that remains unchanged, whether it contains clouds or is perfectly clear, our original awareness remains constant through all the weather patterns of emotion and thought. Consider how often you become identified with temporary mental states throughout your day. Perhaps someone cuts you off in traffic and you become angry, or a colleague receives recognition and you feel jealous, or unexpected expenses arise and you become anxious. In each case, what's really happening is that anger, jealousy, or anxiety is arising in the space of your awareness. The awareness itself remains untouched by these passing phenomena. Master Bankei's questioning technique reveals the impermanent nature of all emotional states. By asking where the anger was before the trigger and where it goes when the trigger is removed, he helps the priest recognize that emotions are temporary visitors rather than permanent residents. This doesn't mean emotions are unimportant or should be suppressed, but rather that we don't need to be enslaved by them. The don't know mind that the priest touches represents what Zen calls beginner's mind, the open, curious awareness that meets each moment without preconceptions. This not knowing is actually a form of profound knowing, the direct recognition of our original nature before it gets filtered through concepts and interpretations. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way. No intentional action is necessary." This points to the same truth Bankei revealed to the priest. Our original nature doesn't require special techniques or states of consciousness to access. It's the very awareness with which we're experiencing this moment right now. The transformation of the priest from disruptor to student illustrates the power of meeting aggression with spacious awareness rather than reactive defense. When we respond to attack with counterattack, we simply escalate conflict. When we meet hostility with the vast space of original mind, we create the possibility for recognition and healing. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Bankei's teaching helps us learn this letting go by recognizing that we never need to hold on to anything, because our essential nature is already complete and unshakable. Tonight, As various thoughts and emotions arise in your awareness, can you recognize the space in which they appear? Can you sense the awareness that remains constant, whether you're experiencing peace or agitation, clarity or confusion? This awareness that you are is the unborn Buddha mind that Bankai pointed toward. As the Buddha said, "Look within, you are the Buddha." Let us now turn to a tale about discovering perfection in our imperfection. In the ancient temple of Eihaiji, where Master Dogen taught the profound simplicity of just sitting, the morning meditation period was sacred time. Monks arranged themselves in perfect rows, backs straight as pine trees, breathing in rhythm with the universe itself. The silence was so complete that even the settling of robes seemed loud in the crystalline air. During one of these meditation sessions, a young monk named Jishin sat in obvious distress. His back ached terribly, his legs had long since gone numb, and his mind wandered like a wild horse despite his best efforts to focus. Every few minutes, he would shift slightly, trying to find a position that didn't cause pain, but this only seemed to make matters worse. His face showed the strain of trying to force himself into some imagined ideal of perfect meditation. Finally, unable to bear his struggle in silence any longer, Jishin approached Master Dogen during the brief break between sitting periods. With obvious embarrassment and frustration, he whispered, "Master, I feel like I'm failing completely at Zazen. My back is screaming with pain. My legs fall asleep until I can't feel them at all. And my mind jumps from thought to thought like a monkey in a tree. No matter how hard I try, I cannot seem to sit correctly. Am I hopeless as a meditation student?" Master Dogen, rather than offering comfort or correction, looked at the young monk with eyes that held both kindness and profound understanding. "Show me," he said quietly, "exactly how you sit incorrectly." Jishin was taken aback by this unusual request, but he demonstrated his posture, slumped slightly from the pain, shifting restlessly, his face tense with effort and self-criticism. His whole being radiated the struggle between what he thought meditation should look like and what his actual experience was providing. Dogen observed carefully, then surprised the monk even further. "Excellent," he said with genuine appreciation. "Now, sit incorrectly with complete commitment. Don't try to fix anything. Don't attempt to improve your posture or calm your mind. Simply be completely dedicated to this incorrect sitting." "Master, I don't understand what you mean," Jishin replied, his confusion evident. "How can incorrect sitting be excellent? Shouldn't I be trying to sit properly?" "Right now," Dogen explained with infinite patience, "you are fighting with your sitting. You have created an image of correct sitting in your mind, and you struggle constantly to match this ideal. This struggle itself is the problem. The back pain, the wandering thoughts, the restless legs. This is your sitting right now. Don't add the extra burden of judgment and resistance to what's already present." The young monk returned to his cushion and tried to follow this strange instruction. But as he attempted to accept his discomfort, he found himself trying to accept correctly, adding yet another layer of effort to his practice. Noticing this, Dogen approached again with a gentle smile. "Now I see you're trying to accept properly. Can you fail at acceptance with complete, wholehearted dedication?" Suddenly, Jishin burst into quiet laughter, finally seeing the endless loop he had created. Every attempt to do something correctly led to more doing, more trying, more effort piled upon effort. In that moment of recognizing the absurdity of his struggle, something shifted fundamentally. "There," Dogen said, with deep satisfaction. "Zazen is not about sitting correctly or incorrectly. It is simply sitting completely, unreservedly, without the extra commentary of judgment. Your struggling was perfect struggling. Your peace is perfect peace. Your confusion is perfect confusion. Just sit and let the sitting do the sitting." From that day forward, Jishin's meditation became effortless, not because he had learned to sit correctly, but because he had stopped sitting incorrectly. He had discovered that the perfection he sought was already present in whatever was actually happening. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that our striving for perfection often creates the very imperfection we're trying to escape. Why do we create such struggle around practices meant to bring peace? Zen Buddhism reveals that our minds are constantly generating ideals and then measuring our experience against these mental constructs. We develop images of what meditation should feel like, how a spiritual person should behave, or what enlightenment should look like. Then we exhaust ourselves, trying to force our actual experience to match these fantasies. This pattern extends far beyond formal meditation practice. Throughout our day, we carry unconscious templates of how we should feel, how others should behave, how situations should unfold. When reality doesn't match these expectations, we add a layer of resistance, judgment, and effort to try to correct the problem. But the problem isn't what's happening, it's our relationship to what's happening. Master Dogen's teaching reveals the radical acceptance that is at the heart of true meditation. This acceptance doesn't mean passive resignation or giving up on growth and healing. Rather, it means meeting this moment exactly as it is, without the extra effort of trying to make it different. Paradoxically, this complete acceptance of what is often allows natural change to occur more readily than all our forcing and striving. Consider your own relationship with perfection and failure. How much energy do you spend each day trying to get your experience to match some ideal? Perhaps you strive to feel more peaceful, more confident, more loving, or more focused. Notice how this very striving often creates tension and dissatisfaction, taking you further from the qualities you're seeking. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Enlightenment is not something you achieve, it's the absence of something. All your life you have been going forward after something, pursuing some goal. Enlightenment is dropping all that." This dropping that Beck describes is exactly what Jishin discovered when he stopped trying to sit correctly. The distinction between doing meditation and being meditation is crucial. When we're doing meditation, we're adding effort, technique, and goal orientation to our sitting. When we're being meditation, we simply rest in awareness without agenda. The first approach creates a meditator who is separate from the meditation. The second recognizes that awareness itself is the meditation. This principle applies to every aspect of spiritual practice and daily life. Instead of trying to be more present, we can simply notice the presence that is already here. Instead of attempting to cultivate compassion, we can recognize the natural kindness that arises when we stop defending against life. Instead of working to find inner peace, we can discover the peace that exists beneath our mental noise. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Jashin's laughter represents the moment when seeking stopped and finding happened naturally. He realized that he had been looking for peace while simultaneously creating disturbance through his very seeking. Tonight, as you settle into rest, can you practice this radical acceptance of your exact experience? If your body is tense, can you let it be tense without trying to relax? If your mind is active, can you let it be active without trying to quiet it? What happens when you stop trying to have a different experience and simply rest in the one that's already here? As the Buddha said, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free. If only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow. But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax, right now, and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master, renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday, my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today, my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by this simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass, watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat. "Terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together, they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Much fresher," the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. "Clean and pure." "Do you taste the salt?" the master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. "No," he said slowly. "I don't taste any salt at all." The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. "My dear student," the master said, "the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant, but the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into." The apprentice listened with new understanding. "When you are in pain," the master continued, "the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses, or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater." The master paused. "Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake. The Buddha once said, 'Pain is certain, suffering is optional.' This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us." What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous, or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single, painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From lake consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory. We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get, so I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents. The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen Master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about the prerequisite for all learning. This story unfolds in the elegant receiving room of a great Zen master's monastery, where a young scholar arrives seeking wisdom. The afternoon light filters softly through rice paper screens as an earnest young man approaches the Zen master's dwelling. This seeker has spent years accumulating knowledge, studying philosophical texts, memorizing spiritual concepts, and debating religious ideas with other learned individuals. His mind brims with theories about enlightenment, quotes from sacred texts, and sophisticated interpretations of ancient teachings. He has come to request instruction in the ways of Zen, confident that his extensive preparation has made him ready for advanced teachings. The Zen master welcomes him warmly and invites him to sit on a simple cushion beside a low wooden table. Without speaking about Zen or enlightenment, the master begins preparing tea with graceful, deliberate movements. Each gesture carries a quality of complete attention as he arranges the ceramic cups, measures the tea leaves, and heats the water to the precise temperature. The young scholar watches somewhat impatiently, eager to discuss profound spiritual matters rather than observe this mundane tea preparation. Surely someone of his sophistication deserves more substantial instruction than watching an old man make tea. The master places an elegant cup before his guest and begins to pour the steaming tea with steady precision. The golden liquid fills the cup to its brim, but the master continues pouring. The tea overflows onto the saucer, then onto the table, and finally begins dripping onto the floor. Still, the master continues pouring. Unable to contain himself any longer, the young man exclaims, "Master, the cup is full! It cannot hold any more tea!" The Zen master sets down the teapot and looks directly into the scholar's eyes. "Indeed," he says quietly, "this cup is like your mind. It is already full. How can I teach you anything about Zen when there is no room in your understanding for new insights? First, empty your cup. Then we can begin." As the Buddha observed, an empty cup can be filled with fresh tea. What emerges from this story is the essential quality of beginner's mind, or shoshin in Japanese, that makes all genuine learning possible. Why do we struggle to maintain the openness that allows new understanding to enter our awareness? Buddhist psychology explains that our accumulated knowledge, opinions, and conceptual frameworks can become barriers to direct experience. When we approach any situation convinced we already know what it contains, we filter everything through our existing beliefs rather than meeting it freshly. This mental fullness operates much more subtly than obvious arrogance. We might consider ourselves humble while still carrying unconscious assumptions about how spiritual practice should unfold, what enlightenment should feel like, or how awakened people should behave. These preconceptions create a kind of spiritual static that interferes with clear perception. The Buddha said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Shunryu Suzuki expanded this teaching, explaining that beginner's mind includes both the wonder that comes from not knowing and the courage to not know. This isn't ignorance, but wise innocence. The willingness to meet each moment without imposing yesterday's understanding upon it. Consider how your accumulated spiritual knowledge might sometimes interfere with direct experience. Perhaps you've read about mindfulness in ways that create expectations about what present moment awareness should feel like. Maybe you've heard descriptions of peace that prevent you from accepting the particular quality of calm available right now. Our concepts about enlightenment can become obstacles to recognizing the enlightenment that's already present. Zen Master Bankei taught his students about the unborn mind that exists before thoughts, concepts, and learned behaviors shape our perception. This original awareness doesn't need to be created through practice. It only needs to be recognized beneath the accumulation of mental content. But recognition requires the humility to not know, even about our most treasured insights. The practice of emptying our cup happens moment by moment. Each time we notice ourselves rushing to conclusions, defending positions, or filtering experience through familiar categories, we can pause and ask, what would I see if I didn't already know what this is? This beginner's mind applies not only to spiritual matters, but to every encounter with life. What would it mean to approach your partner as if meeting them for the first time? How might your work transform if you brought fresh curiosity to familiar tasks? What would become possible if you released your suppositions about your own limitations and capabilities? Tonight, as you rest in these moments before sleep, can you empty your cup of the day's accumulated judgments and interpretations? Perhaps you'll discover that not knowing creates space for a deeper kind of knowing to emerge, one that comes not from the mind but from the heart's direct recognition of truth. As the Buddha taught, the wise find pleasure in the truth. This truth reveals itself most clearly to minds humble enough to remain empty, ready to be filled with each moment's unique teaching. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the fluid nature of circumstances and the wisdom of withholding judgment. This is the tale of an old farmer and the art of living with uncertainty. In a remote valley surrounded by rolling mountains, an elderly farmer lives with his adult son in a simple farmhouse that has sheltered their family for generations. Their life is modest but sufficient, sustained by a small plot of vegetables and their most valuable possession, a strong, reliable horse that helps with all the heavy work of farming and transportation. One morning, the farmer awakens to discover that the horse has disappeared during the night. The gate stands open, and there are no tracks indicating theft. The animal has simply wandered off into the vast wilderness beyond their valley. For a farming family, losing their only horse represents a catastrophic setback that threatens their livelihood and survival. Word of this misfortune spreads quickly through their small community. By afternoon, neighbors begin arriving to express their sympathy and support. "Oh, how terrible this is for you," they exclaim with genuine concern. "What dreadful luck! How will you manage the farm without your horse? This is truly a disaster." The old farmer listens to their well-meaning condolences with calm attention, then responds simply, "How do you know this is bad luck?" His neighbors exchange puzzled glances. Surely the loss of such an essential animal is obviously unfortunate. But the old man's serene expression reveals no trace of the distress they expect to see. He continues with his daily activities as if nothing particularly significant has occurred. The next morning brings an extraordinary development. The missing horse returns, not alone, but followed by a small herd of wild horses, magnificent, powerful animals that have chosen to follow the domestic horse back to the farm. The farmer and his son quickly construct temporary fencing to contain this unexpected windfall. The same neighbors who had offered sympathy now rush over to share in the celebration. "What incredible good fortune," they declare with excitement. "You've gone from having one horse to owning an entire herd. This is the best luck anyone could imagine. You must be overjoyed by this blessing." Again, the old farmer listens thoughtfully to their enthusiastic congratulations before responding with the same calm curiosity. "How do you know this is good luck?" The following day, the farmer's son attempts to break one of the wild horses for riding. These animals, though beautiful, have never known human handling and resist fiercely. During the training session, the young man is thrown violently from the horse's back and suffers a severe break in his leg that leaves him unable to walk without assistance. Once more, the neighbors gather to offer their support in what appears to be another turn toward misfortune. "How dreadful," they lament, shaking their heads at this latest setback. "Just when things were looking so positive, this terrible accident happens. Your poor son. What bad luck has befallen your family again?" The old farmer tends to his son's injury with gentle care while responding to their expressions of sympathy with familiar words. "How do you know this is bad luck?" Within days, their question finds an unexpected answer. Military officers arrive in the valley with orders to conscript all able-bodied young men for a dangerous war against northern invaders. Most of these soldiers will not return home alive. However, when they examine the farmer's son, his broken leg makes him unsuitable for military service. He remains safely at home while other families say goodbye to their children, perhaps forever. The Buddha taught, every blessing ignored becomes a curse. Every curse faced becomes a blessing. What emerges from this story is the profound wisdom of holding our judgments about circumstances lightly, recognizing that our perspective is always partial and temporary. Why do we rush to label experiences as fortunate or unfortunate when their ultimate meaning remains unknown? Buddhist psychology explains that our minds seek the comfort of quick categorization, preferring the illusion of understanding to the discomfort of uncertainty. We want to know immediately whether to celebrate or mourn, to relax or worry, to feel grateful or resentful. This mental habit of instant evaluation reflects a deeper pattern of trying to control our emotional responses by controlling our interpretations of events. If we can quickly determine that something is good or bad, we believe we know how to feel and what to expect. This provides temporary psychological relief, but often proves premature and misleading. The old farmer's repeated question, "How do you know?" points to what Buddhist philosophy calls "don't know mind." This isn't ignorance, but wisdom, the recognition that reality unfolds in ways too complex and interconnected for our limited perspective to fully comprehend. What appears devastating in the moment may prove beneficial over time, while apparent blessings may carry hidden difficulties. Consider how many experiences in your own life have changed meaning as their consequences became clear. Perhaps a job rejection led to a better opportunity. Maybe a relationship ending created space for personal growth. Possibly an illness brought unexpected insights about what truly matters. The disappointment you felt at the time now seems misplaced given what followed. This doesn't mean we should become emotionally numb or stop having natural responses to events. The farmer certainly wanted his horse back and felt concern for his son's injury, but he distinguished between acknowledging immediate circumstances and creating elaborate stories about their ultimate significance. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught about beginner's mind, approaching each situation with fresh openness rather than predetermined assumptions about its meaning. When we practice this kind of mental flexibility, we become more resilient and responsive to changing conditions rather than rigid and reactive. The art of living that this story illustrates involves developing what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain present and responsive regardless of whether circumstances align with our preferences. This isn't passive resignation, but dynamic engagement without attachment to specific outcomes. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron describes this as learning to stay with the experience instead of immediately jumping to conclusions about what it means for our future happiness or security. When we can rest in not knowing, we often discover that our wisdom about how to respond emerges naturally from the situation itself. The farmer's approach also demonstrates tremendous faith, not in specific outcomes, but in the fundamental trustworthiness of life's process. He acts skillfully with whatever arises while remaining open to possibilities beyond his current understanding. Tonight, as you reflect on recent events you've labeled as fortunate or unfortunate, can you hold those judgments more lightly? Perhaps you'll discover that your peace of mind depends less on having good luck and more on developing the capacity to respond wisely to whatever unfolds. As the Buddha observed, everything changes, nothing remains without change. This includes our interpretations of whether those changes serve our deepest welfare. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about the immediate nature of spiritual states and how they manifest through our present moment awareness. This is heaven and hell. A monk had traveled from the distant province of Busan, journeying many days through mountain paths and across rivers to reach Master Sengai's temple. He carried with him questions that had been troubling his mind for months, metaphysical concerns about the nature of existence and the ultimate destinations of human souls. These were not casual inquiries, but deep spiritual problems that had disturbed his meditation and left him unable to find peace in his practice. Upon arriving at the temple, the monk requested a formal audience with the master to discuss matters of the highest spiritual importance. When he was granted this meeting, he approached with the serious demeanor of one who believed he was about to engage in profound theological discourse. "Master," he began with ceremonial gravity, "I have come seeking wisdom about the ultimate realities. What can you tell me about heaven? What is the nature of this blessed realm that awaits the righteous? How should we understand the rewards that come to those who live virtuously?" Without any verbal response, Master Sengai simply lay down on the floor as if preparing for sleep. He closed his eyes peacefully and settled into a position of complete relaxation, embodying a state of perfect contentment and ease. The monk waited respectfully for some time, expecting that this demonstration was perhaps a prelude to verbal teaching, or that the master was gathering his thoughts for a comprehensive explanation. When no words came, he decided to continue with his questioning, hoping to prompt a more conventional response. "And what about hell?" the monk persisted, his voice carrying the same earnest concern. "Please help me understand the nature of suffering in the afterlife. What awaits those who live wrongly? How should we comprehend divine punishment and the consequences of negative karma?" Master Sengai's response was immediate and theatrical. He closed his eyes tightly and began snoring loudly, producing exaggerated sounds that filled the meditation hall with unmistakable noise and disturbance. The monk's patience finally reached its limit. His long journey, his sincere spiritual seeking, his respectful approach, all of this seemed to be met with mockery and disrespect. "I've come all this way to question him seriously about the Dharma," he muttered indignantly, "and he has the rudeness to just fall asleep. What kind of spiritual teacher behaves this way?" Glaring at the master with obvious frustration, and feeling deeply insulted by what he perceived as dismissive treatment, the monk began gathering his belongings and started moving toward the door, ready to leave in disgust. At that precise moment, Master Sengai sat up abruptly with the alertness of someone who had never been sleeping at all. Pointing directly at the departing monk, he remarked with perfect clarity and timing, "That is hell." The Buddha understood that we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but immediate experiences created by our present moment state of consciousness. This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to seek spiritual understanding in abstract concepts and future scenarios, rather than recognizing the sacred realities available in each moment. The monk's earnest questions about metaphysical destinations prevented him from seeing the heaven and hell being demonstrated directly in his immediate experience. When Master Sengai lay down peacefully to demonstrate heaven, he wasn't offering a symbol or metaphor. He was embodying the actual state of consciousness that constitutes heavenly experience. complete ease, perfect contentment, freedom from agitation or striving. These qualities represent the essence of what we imagine heaven to be, available right now through present moment awareness. Similarly, his loud snoring to represent hell wasn't merely theatrical. The disturbance, agitation, and disruption he created mirrored the mental states that create hellish experiences in our daily lives. Hell isn't a place we go to after death. It's the quality of consciousness we experience when caught in anger, frustration, judgment, and resistance. Why do we consistently look for spiritual truth in complex explanations and future possibilities, rather than recognizing what's immediately available? This pattern reflects our conditioning to believe that profound realities must be complicated, distant, or requiring special qualifications to access. We miss the heaven that's present in simple contentment because we're scanning for something more dramatic or exotic. The monk's angry departure perfectly demonstrated the hell realm that Master Sengai had just been illustrating through his snoring. Caught in frustration, judgment, and indignation, the monk was literally living in hell, not as punishment for wrongdoing, but as the natural consequence of his mental state. His experience was determined not by external circumstances, but by his internal responses to those circumstances. This teaching reveals something crucial about the nature of spiritual realization. Heaven and hell are not rewards and punishments administered by external authorities, but natural expressions of how consciousness experiences itself. When we're at peace, present, and accepting, we inhabit heaven regardless of our external conditions. When we're agitated, resistant, and judgmental, we create hell regardless of our circumstances. We can observe these shifting states throughout each day. The moment of perfect satisfaction with a simple meal, that's heaven. The spiral of anger when someone cuts us off in traffic, that's hell. The contentment of watching sunset colors change across the sky, heaven again. The mental torture of replaying an embarrassing moment, back to hell. Zen practice cultivates the ability to recognize these states as they arise and to understand our role in creating them. Rather than being victims of circumstances that impose heaven or hell upon us, we discover our power to choose which realm we inhabit through our responses to whatever appears. This story also points us toward understanding the immediacy of spiritual transformation. We don't need to wait until after death or until we've achieved some advanced level of realization to experience the essence of what we call heaven. It's available whenever we can settle into simple presence and acceptance of what is. The monk's expectation that spiritual teaching should come through complex explanations and theological discussions prevented him from receiving the direct transmission that Master Sengai offered. True Dharma teaching often bypasses intellectual understanding to point directly toward immediate experience. The most profound truths are often demonstrated rather than explained. Additionally, our minds tend to create elaborate future scenarios, both hoped for and feared, that distract us from engaging fully with present experience. The monk's concern about ultimate destinations in the afterlife made him unavailable to the ultimate realities being revealed in the current moment. We also find ourselves confronted by the question of what constitutes respectful spiritual inquiry. The monk felt insulted by the master's unconventional teaching methods, but his angry response revealed that his respect was conditional on receiving instruction in the format he expected, rather than in the form that would be most effective. Tonight, as you notice your mental states shifting throughout the evening, can you recognize the moments when you're creating heaven through acceptance and presence, and the moments when you're creating hell through resistance and agitation. What would it mean to take conscious responsibility for which realm you inhabit, regardless of external circumstances? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Heaven is not a reward for good behavior, but the natural expression of a peaceful mind, available in any moment when we stop creating hell through our resistance to what is. Let us now explore a story about the invisible burdens we carry through life. This is the tale of the empty backpack. In a serene monastery garden, where morning dew glistened on carefully tended paths, a young seeker approached his teacher with a question weighing heavily on his heart. His eyes reflected both determination and confusion as he bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "I wish to understand my path on earth better. Why do I seem to carry my past and relive it again and again? Why can't I get past my past?" The master studied the young man with compassionate eyes, then gestured toward an intricate maze of translucent silk panels shimmering in the garden's filtered sunlight. "Go forward into the maze," he said, reaching for a leather backpack. "But carry this as you walk. It will help you stay focused. Be careful though, as it is quite heavy." The young man accepted the backpack, initially surprised by how easily the master handed it over. But the moment it settled into his grasp, he gasped. The weight was extraordinary, forcing him to bend forward as he struggled toward the maze. Inside the silken labyrinth, he immediately encountered solid walls. Through the translucent material, he could see other seekers navigating their paths like distant ghosts. No matter which direction he turned, every path seemed blocked. Exhausted, he sat down to think. "Others are clearly ahead of me," he thought. "Should I cheat and crawl under the silk?" After wrestling with these thoughts, he chose integrity. As he stood with renewed resolve, an opening magically appeared. Progress felt rewarding until he faced another wall. This time, good intentions yielded no results. The backpack's weight became unbearable, cutting into his shoulders. What could be so heavy yet feel so soft? Overcome with curiosity, he removed the pack and peered inside. It was completely empty. Yet when he lifted it again, the weight remained undeniable. As he placed it back on his shoulders, a voice whispered clearly, "Look inside of you, young man, for the weight lies there." Suddenly, memories flooded his consciousness. His childhood tormentors, accumulated hurts, and resentments carried for years. As he relived each painful experience, the backpack grew heavier. Then understanding dawned. "I am the weight. I carry the burden of that which troubles me." With this insight, he began the work of forgiveness. "I forgive you, wherever you are," he found himself saying. Immediately, the pack lightened and new pathways opened. As sunlight warmed his face, and he remembered moments of love, the weight continued diminishing until the backpack felt weightless. Finally, surrounded by solid silk walls, he sat in meditation. "I am the light and the way. I recognize that I was the impediment, not anyone else." At these words, his feet began rising from the earth. He floated above the maze, seeing how others remained trapped by darkness in their own packs. With a thought, he found himself beside his teacher outside the labyrinth. "Master," he said, his face radiant, "I discovered that my darkness caused my weight, and my lightness freed me to fly." The master smiled knowingly. "What do you feel, young one? Do you feel freed?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked away. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound truth revealed in the empty backpack story. We are the creators of our own burdens. What emerges from this tale is recognition that our past does not imprison us. Our relationship to our past does. The young seeker discovered that suffering came not from what others had done, but from his unwillingness to release those experiences. The empty backpack represents the invisible weight of unprocessed emotions and unhealed wounds we carry through life. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our pain? First is our identification with wounds. We derive identity from grievances, thinking, I am someone who was wronged, rather than, I experienced wronging, but I'm not defined by it. Second is our addiction to the familiar. Even painful emotions become comfortable because they're known. Third is our misunderstanding of forgiveness, believing it means condoning harmful behavior rather than freeing ourselves from resentment's prison. Consider how this plays out daily. The colleague who received credit for your idea still triggers anger. The parent who criticized you decades ago still influences your self-talk. Each is an invisible item in your backpack, weighing you down. Zen teacher Jack Cornfield taught, forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past. We cannot change what happened, but we can change our relationship to what happened. The energy spent maintaining grievances could be redirected toward creating the life we actually want. The floating represents lightness available when we release psychological burdens. This isn't about bypassing pain, but processing experiences fully and choosing freedom over familiarity, growth over grievance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what invisible weight might you be carrying? Perhaps it's time to examine what you've been holding on to and ask, does this serve my highest good, or is it time to set it down? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The path to freedom begins with radical self-forgiveness and willingness to travel light through life's inevitable challenges. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distractions started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. Let us continue on our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism with a story about the phantoms we create with our own minds. This is the tale of the haunting that was no haunting at all. A man lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years, their love deep and genuine, their companionship a source of daily joy. But as fate would have it, she became gravely ill. As she lay on her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her strength fading, she grasped her husband's hand with surprising force. "My darling," she whispered, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "I cannot bear the thought of leaving you, and I cannot bear the thought of you loving another. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not see any other women. Promise me you will remain faithful to my memory forever, or I swear I will return from the grave to haunt you." The husband, his heart breaking at her words and her impending departure, made the promise she demanded. What else could he do? In that moment of grief and love, he would have agreed to anything to ease her suffering and honor their bond. For several months after her death, the widower kept his word. He avoided social gatherings, declined invitations, and turned away from any possibility of female companionship. His world became small and lonely, filled only with work and memories. But as time passed and the sharpest edge of grief began to soften, he found himself drawn back into the world of the living. It was at a local market that he met her, a kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he found himself drawn to this new person. Conversations led to friendship. Friendship deepened into affection. And eventually, despite his guilt and internal conflict, he fell in love again. The night he and his new love became engaged, his worst fears materialized. As he lay in bed, the room suddenly grew cold, and there before him stood the unmistakable figure of his dead wife. Her face was pale with anger, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You have broken your promise to me," she said, her voice carrying the chill of the grave. "You have betrayed our love and dishonored my memory." But what truly terrified the man was not just her appearance. It was her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she would return to torment him, recounting in perfect detail everything that had transpired between him and his fiancée. She would repeat their conversations word for word, describe their private moments, reveal their most intimate exchanges. Nothing remained hidden from this ghostly presence. The haunting became so intense that the man could no longer sleep. Dark circles formed under his eyes, his hands shook constantly, and his new relationship began to suffer under the weight of his terror and exhaustion. Desperate for relief, he sought out a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," the man said, his voice trembling as he recounted his story, "my dead wife's ghost appears to me every night. She knows everything I do, everything I say. She repeats our conversations exactly as they happened. I am being driven to madness." The old master listened carefully, stroking his beard thoughtfully. When the man finished his account, the master smiled knowingly. "This is indeed a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such supernatural wisdom. But I will tell you exactly what to do when she appears tonight." That evening, as the room grew cold and the familiar figure materialized, the man followed the master's instructions precisely. "You are truly a wise and all-knowing spirit," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you possess such incredible powers and I can hide nothing from you, surely you can answer one simple question for me." "Ask your question," the ghost replied coldly. The man reached down to a large bag of beans that sat near his bedside table. He scooped up a handful and held his closed fist toward the apparition. "Tell me exactly how many beans I am holding in my hand right now." The ghost opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her form began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges. For the first time since her appearances began, she looked uncertain, even confused. I cannot," she stammered, and then, like morning mist touched by sunlight, she simply vanished. The ghost never returned again, and the man was finally free to live his life in peace. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully our minds can create seemingly real experiences from nothing but guilt, fear, and unresolved emotions. Why do we give such power to the ghosts of our own making? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from external forces, but from the phantoms we create through our own psychological patterns. The ghost in this story was nothing more than the man's own guilt and conditioning, projected outward and given form by his tormented mind. Consider how often in your own life you are haunted by voices that seem to know your every move, that judge your every decision, that remind you of promises you've broken or standards you've failed to meet. These internalized critics often speak with the voices of people from our past, parents, teachers, former partners, but their power comes entirely from our own minds giving them substance. The man's ghost could recite his conversations perfectly because it was his own memory playing them back to him. It knew his private moments because it was created by his own consciousness. It appeared when his guilt was strongest because guilt was its very substance. The ghost was real in its effects, but had no independent existence. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what our minds are adding to the situation. The man was genuinely in love with a new person, but his conditioning told him this was a betrayal. His deceased wife was genuinely gone, but his unprocessed grief and guilt kept her psychologically present. The master's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. By asking the ghost to know something that existed only in the present moment, something the man's own mind couldn't possibly know, he revealed the phantom's true nature. The beans in his hand were unknown even to him until he counted them. No amount of memory, guilt, or psychological projection could provide this information. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true, they're not necessarily important, and they're not necessarily ours." The ghost's accusations felt absolutely real to the man, but they were simply thoughts and emotions given form by his own mental processes. Look deeply at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry that speak with impossible authority about your worth, your choices, your future? Often these voices claim to know things they cannot possibly know. What others really think of you, what will happen if you take risks, whether you deserve happiness or love. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. When we understand that we are constantly creating our experience through the stories we tell ourselves, we begin to see that we also have the power to question these stories, to test their validity, to challenge their authority over our lives. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear arising in your mind, can you remember the man and his handful of beans? Can you find the courage to ask these internal critics to prove their supernatural knowledge by answering questions they cannot possibly answer? Can you recognize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know far less than they claim? As the Buddha observed, doubt everything, find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power the moment we stop feeding them with our belief, the moment we see them for what they truly are, not supernatural visitations, but creations of our own minds that can be dissolved as easily as they were formed. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady, as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction. Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walks slowly through a dense forest, his shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams deferred. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Exhausted from walking and thinking, he stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he murmured to himself. Instantly, as if materializing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick or illusion. The water looked pure, inviting. Tentatively, he brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his parched throat needed. That was strange, he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but nourishing meal appeared before him on a wooden plate. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been harvested. The aroma made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house materialized. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Spacious rooms filled with light, comfortable furnishings, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I'll need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The rational voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman.
This is ridiculous. I'm not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real.
As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally, even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree, with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he muttered, and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply conditioned pattern in the human mind, the tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems, that abundance feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This reflexive doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we've been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what's possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with cynicism and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed, but his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things, and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have ulterior motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we're not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there's a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to self-defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we're dismissing good fortune, abundance, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. Can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests? Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it's fulfilled by them. And our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it's expanded. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master was sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Let us now turn to a story about generosity in the face of poverty and the profound recognition of what truly cannot be stolen. This is the moon in the window. Master Ryokan lived in conditions of voluntary simplicity that would have challenged even the most committed ascetic. His small mountain hut contained virtually no possessions, no treasures, no valuable objects, no accumulations of any kind that might tempt a thief or provide security for the future. His few belongings consisted only of the most basic necessities: worn robes, simple eating utensils, and perhaps a book or two for contemplation. On this particular evening, as Master Ryokan rested peacefully in his humble dwelling, a sneak thief approached through the darkness, believing he had found an easy target in what appeared to be an unguarded dwelling. The thief moved carefully, avoiding any sounds that might alert the occupant to his presence, and managed to slip inside the hut undetected. Once inside, however, the burglar quickly discovered the reality of the master's lifestyle. He searched methodically through the small space, examining every corner and crevice where valuables might be hidden, but found absolutely nothing worth stealing. There were no coins, no jewelry, no fine fabrics, no tools of value, nothing that could be easily carried away and converted into money or traded for necessities. The thief stood in the middle of the sparse room, frustrated and disappointed by this complete lack of anything worth taking. He had risked detection and potential punishment for what appeared to be a completely fruitless endeavor. After investing time and effort in this nocturnal enterprise, he was faced with the prospect of returning home empty-handed, with nothing to show for his criminal efforts. Just as the discouraged thief was preparing to leave in defeat, Master Ryokan's voice emerged gently from the darkness. Rather than shouting for help or expressing anger at this intrusion into his privacy, the master spoke with the kind of compassionate concern he might show toward any guest who was experiencing difficulty. "Wait," the master called softly. "Don't leave yet." The thief froze, expecting to be confronted, accused. or perhaps threatened with consequences for his attempted burglary. Instead, he watched in amazement as Master Ryokan quietly rose from his sleeping area and began removing the old cotton-quilted bedclothes that provided his warmth during the cool mountain nights. Without a word of reproach or any indication that he considered this intrusion a violation, the master folded his bedding carefully and offered it to the bewildered thief. "Here," he said simply. "Take this. You've come all this way and deserve something for your trouble." The thief accepted the unexpected gift in stunned silence, unsure how to respond to such extraordinary generosity from someone he had intended to rob. This was unlike any encounter with a victim he had ever experienced. The master's kindness left him speechless and somehow ashamed of his original intentions. As the confused burglar departed with the master's bedding, Master Ryokan stood in his doorway and noticed that the moon had risen over the eastern mountains, casting its serene light across the landscape. The beauty of this sight inspired him to compose a traditional waka poem that captured both his physical situation and his spiritual understanding. Left untouched by the thief in his haste, the moon in the window. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils a teaching about the difference between material wealth and true abundance, and the recognition that our deepest treasures cannot be taken by any external force. This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with possession, security, and the fear of loss that dominates so much of human experience. Master Ryokan's response to the thief reveals someone who understood that genuine wealth consists not in what we accumulate, but in our capacity for generosity, compassion, and appreciation of beauty that requires no ownership. The master's immediate impulse to give something to the disappointed thief demonstrates a revolutionary understanding of abundance. Rather than feeling victimized by someone who had tried to take from him, he experienced concern for someone who seemed to be in need. His poverty became a source of generosity rather than a reason for defensiveness or fear. Why do we typically respond to attempted theft with anger, outrage, and desire for punishment rather than compassion for the thief's desperation? This reaction stems from our identification with our possessions as extensions of ourselves, and our belief that being robbed somehow diminishes our worth or security. But Master Ryokan's response suggests a different relationship with material goods, one based on stewardship rather than attachment. His poem about the moon reveals the profound teaching at the heart of this story. The thief could take material objects, but could never steal the master's appreciation of beauty, his capacity for wonder, his ability to find joy in simple, natural phenomena. These internal treasures, peace, contentment, aesthetic sensitivity, remain completely beyond the reach of any external threat. The image of the moon in the window represents all the gifts that life offers freely to anyone with eyes to see them. Beauty, mystery, natural wonder, and the kind of wealth that increases rather than decreases when shared. The thief left with fabric that would eventually wear out, but the master retained access to beauty that would never diminish, and joy that no one could take away. This teaching reveals the difference between having and being. Material possessions require constant protection, can be lost or stolen, and often create more anxiety than genuine security. But the qualities of consciousness that Master Ryokan embodied, generosity, peace, appreciation, become stronger through expression, rather than weaker through sharing. We can observe similar dynamics in our own relationship with loss and theft. When someone takes something from us, do we focus primarily on what we've lost, or on our capacity to respond with wisdom and compassion? Can we recognize opportunities to practice generosity even in situations that initially seem to call for defensive reactions? The story also points us toward understanding true security. Master Ryokan felt safe not because he had elaborate locks or security systems, but because he had nothing worth stealing in conventional terms and everything worth having in spiritual terms. His security came from inner abundance rather than external accumulation. Zen practice cultivates what might be called non-possessive appreciation, the ability to enjoy beauty and goodness without needing to own or control them. When we can appreciate the moon without needing to possess it, we access a form of wealth that no economic conditions can threaten. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that voluntary simplicity means deprivation or sacrifice. But Master Ryokan's story suggests the opposite, that reducing our attachment to material accumulation can actually increase our access to the forms of wealth that truly matter. His poverty became a gateway to generosity rather than a limitation on his capacity to give. The thief's hasty departure suggests that he recognized something in the master's response that challenged his entire framework for understanding value and security. Being met with kindness instead of anger, generosity instead of defensiveness, probably planted seeds that would continue growing long after he left the mountain hut. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the transformative power of unexpected responses. By meeting attempted theft with spontaneous giving, Master Ryokan created a moment of grace that had the potential to change not only the thief's immediate experience, but his entire understanding of human nature and the possibilities for positive interaction. Tonight, as you consider what you most fear losing and what you consider your greatest treasures, can you distinguish between the possessions that can be taken from you and the qualities of awareness that remain completely beyond any external threat? What would it mean to invest more energy in developing the kind of wealth that increases through sharing rather than decreases through loss? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The moon in the window represents the eternal treasures that remain available to anyone who has learned to let go of attachment while remaining open to the beauty and wonder that no thief can ever steal. Our next story reveals a profound lesson about the nature of anger and our projections onto others. This is The Empty Boat. A young boatman known for his fiery temper was ferrying his small wooden craft across a wide, misty river in the early morning hours. He took great pride in his navigational skills and the care he brought to his work. But the slightest inconvenience or disruption could send him into a blazing rage. His reputation for explosive anger was well known among the other river workers, who often avoided him during his darker moods. On this particular morning, thick fog had settled over the water, reducing visibility to just a few feet in any direction. The boatman squinted through the grey mist, carefully steering his vessel across the familiar waters. Suddenly, through the swirling fog, he saw another boat moving directly toward him on a collision course. "Hey, turn aside!" he shouted into the mist, his voice echoing across the water. "You're going to hit me! Can't you see where you're going?" But the other boat continued steadily forward, showing no sign of changing direction. The boatman's anger began to build as he shouted again, his voice now filled with fury. He cursed the other pilot's carelessness and incompetence, his rage growing with each passing second. Despite his increasingly angry warnings, the other boat struck his own with a solid, jarring thud. Now boiling with indignation, the boatman was ready to leap into the other vessel and give its foolish pilot a piece of his mind. He prepared himself for a confrontation, ready to unleash all his pent-up frustration on the person who had so carelessly disrupted his morning journey. His fists were clenched, his face red with anger as he moved toward the other boat. But as he peered through the mist at the vessel that had struck him, he discovered something that stopped him completely. The boat was empty. There was no pilot at the tiller, no person to blame or confront. It was simply a drifting boat that had been carried into his path by the river's current. In that instant, his anger vanished completely. It was impossible to be furious at an empty boat. There was no target for his rage, no one to receive his harsh words. All the aggressive energy that had built up inside him suddenly had nowhere to go. He simply pushed the empty vessel away and continued his journey, his mind now as calm as the misty river around him. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how much of our anger is directed at empty boats, projections of intention where none exists. This tale unveils a fundamental truth about the nature of human reactivity. Most of our emotional suffering comes not from what others actually do to us, but from the stories we create about their motivations, intentions, and character. We assume malice where there might be distraction, disrespect where there might be ignorance, and personal attack where there might be simple circumstance. Why do we so readily populate empty boats with imaginary pilots to blame? Our minds evolved to quickly assess threats and assign agency to potentially dangerous situations. This survival mechanism served our ancestors well when distinguishing between a rustling bush caused by wind versus a predator. But in modern social situations, this same tendency leads us to attribute deliberate, harmful intent to actions that may have no such motivation. Think about your daily interactions. When someone cuts you off in traffic, do you immediately assume they're inconsiderate and selfish? When a colleague doesn't return your greeting, do you decide they're being rude or dismissive? When a friend cancels plans last minute, do you interpret it as a sign they don't value your friendship? In each case, you may be creating a pilot for an empty boat. The driver who cut you off might be rushing to the hospital with a sick child. Your colleague might be preoccupied with devastating personal news. Your friend might be struggling with anxiety or depression. Most people's actions have far more to do with their internal experience than with any intention to harm you. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we react to our interpretations rather than to what actually happened, we're fighting empty boats. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to set appropriate boundaries. If someone's behavior affects you negatively, you can address it skillfully without creating elaborate stories about their motivations. You can say, "When you interrupted me, I felt unheard," rather than, "You're always so disrespectful and self-centered." The practice involves pausing when anger arises and asking, "Am I reacting to what actually happened, or to the story I'm telling myself about what happened? Am I angry at a person's actions or at the pilot I've imagined in their empty boat? In Zen meditation, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions as passing phenomena rather than absolute truths. When anger arises, instead of immediately believing and acting on it, we can notice, anger is here. What story is my mind creating? What am I assuming about this person's intentions? The Buddha said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." Each time we populate an empty boat with a malicious pilot, we create suffering for ourselves. Each time we remember that most boats are simply drifting with the current, we free ourselves from unnecessary reactivity. Tonight, as you reflect on recent moments of frustration or anger, can you identify which boats were truly piloted and which were empty? Can you feel the difference in your body between reacting to harmful intent versus responding to simple circumstance? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. When we stop fighting empty boats, we discover that peace was available all along. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the futility of trying to escape aspects of ourselves. This is the man who ran from his shadow. There once lived a man who had developed an intense fear of his own shadow and a deep hatred for his footprints. Every morning when he woke and saw his shadow following him wherever he went, he felt a wave of revulsion and anxiety. The dark silhouette seemed to mock him, mimicking his every movement and gesture. When he walked across sandy ground or dusty paths, he would look back and see the trail of footprints he had left behind. And these too filled him with disgust and shame. "These things torment me," he thought to himself one day, as he watched his shadow dance on the wall. "My shadow follows me everywhere, reminding me of my presence in this world, and my footprints leave evidence of everywhere I've been. I must find a way to escape from them completely." So he devised what seemed like a logical plan. He would run away from his shadow and outpace his footprints. If he could just move fast enough, surely he could leave these troublesome companions behind. Early one morning, he began to run, determined to free himself from their persistent presence. But as he ran, something frustrating happened. Every time he put his foot down, another footprint appeared in the dirt behind him. His shadow had no trouble at all keeping up with him, moving effortlessly alongside him no matter how fast he moved. The faster he ran, the more footprints he created, and his shadow seemed to grow more animated with each stride. "I'm not running fast enough," he concluded, breathing hard but unwilling to give up. "If I can just increase my speed, I'll surely outdistance them." So he ran faster and faster, his heart pounding and his breath coming in gasps. Sweat poured down his face as he pushed his body to its limits, but still his shadow kept perfect pace with him, and still each step created another footprint in his wake. His frustration grew into desperation as he realized his plan wasn't working. Hour after hour, he continued this frantic chase, running faster and faster, never stopping for a moment's rest. His body began to ache, his lungs burned, and his legs trembled with exhaustion. But he was so fixated on escaping his shadow and footprints that he couldn't see the simple futility of his efforts. Finally, after running for what felt like an eternity, he collapsed from complete exhaustion and died there on the path, his shadow still beside him and his footprints trailing behind him, all the way back to where his desperate journey had begun. What the man never understood was that the solution to his problem was remarkably simple. If he had merely stepped into the shade of a tree, his shadow would have vanished completely. And if he had simply sat down and remained still, there would have been no more footprints. As the Buddha observed, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This ancient wisdom reveals a profound truth about our relationship to the aspects of ourselves we try to escape or eliminate. The deeper teaching here shows us how much energy we waste trying to run away from fundamental aspects of our existence, rather than learning to work skillfully with them. The shadow in this story represents all the parts of ourselves we find unacceptable: our anger, our sadness, our fears, our perceived flaws, or our past mistakes. The footprints represent the evidence of our impact on the world, the traces we leave behind that we sometimes wish we could erase. This pattern of running from ourselves manifests in countless ways throughout our lives. We might try to escape our tendency toward anxiety by staying constantly busy, only to create more stress and more anxiety. We might attempt to outrun our loneliness by filling every moment with social activity, never giving ourselves the stillness necessary to address the root of our isolation. Why do we believe we can solve internal problems through external action? The mind convinces us that if we can just change our circumstances, alter our environment, or modify our behavior sufficiently, we can escape the uncomfortable aspects of our psyche. But as the running man discovered, this approach often intensifies the very problems we're trying to solve. Think about the shadows you might be running from in your own life. Perhaps you're trying to escape feelings of inadequacy by working excessive hours, creating more exhaustion and less time for the self-care that might actually address your insecurity. Maybe you're attempting to avoid grief after a loss by staying constantly entertained, preventing yourself from processing the emotions that need to be felt for healing to occur. The footprints we try to escape might be past mistakes, relationships that ended badly, or choices we regret. We exhaust ourselves trying to outrun the consequences of our history rather than learning to make peace with our imperfect human journey. Zen Buddhism points toward a radically different approach. Instead of running from our shadows, we can learn to step into the shade. Instead of trying to eliminate our footprints, we can learn to walk more mindfully. The very things we're trying to escape often contain the seeds of our liberation when we stop fleeing and start facing them with compassion. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox captures the essence of working skillfully with our shadows. We can accept ourselves completely while still engaging in growth and healing, but from a place of self-compassion rather than self-rejection. The shade of the tree in the story represents the sanctuary we find when we stop running and start practicing self-acceptance. When we turn toward our difficult emotions with kindness rather than resistance, they often dissolve naturally, like shadows disappearing in the shade. When we cease the frantic activity designed to prove our worth or escape our discomfort, we create space for genuine rest and insight. The Buddha said, "The way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart." The path to freedom from our shadows leads through them, not around them. By bringing compassionate attention to the parts of ourselves we've been running from, we transform our relationship to them completely. Consider what might change if you stopped running from your particular shadows tomorrow. What if you approached your anxiety with curiosity rather than resistance? What if you met your sadness with compassion rather than distraction? What if you examined your mistakes with learning rather than shame? Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice if there are any aspects of yourself you've been trying to outrun. Can you imagine stepping into the shade of self-acceptance, even briefly? What would it feel like to sit still long enough that no new footprints of regret or shame get created? As the Buddha taught, the trouble is you think you have time, but actually, the time to stop running and find peace with yourself is always right now. Tonight, as we draw our time together to a gentle end, can you feel how the calmness you've discovered isn't something you need to chase or earn, but something that was already there, patiently waiting beneath the surface noise of everyday life? Can you sense that the deep understanding you've touched through these stories lives not in distant teachings, but right here in your own quiet awareness, always available whenever you remember to look? The Buddha reminded us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. As you reflect on this wisdom, notice that the tranquility and insight you've experienced tonight don't require perfect conditions or special knowledge to access. They emerge naturally from your own mind when you allow yourself to simply be present. Each story we've shared has offered you a different doorway into the same essential understanding: that happiness comes not from getting what we want, but from wanting what we already have. That freedom isn't about controlling our circumstances, but about changing how we relate to them. And that wisdom isn't something complicated we need to achieve, but something simple we need to remember. Even when your thoughts start racing again, even when daily stress returns tomorrow, the insights you've absorbed tonight have taken root in the quiet depths of your mind. They're now part of you, ready to surface whenever you need them most, like trusted friends who appear just when you need guidance. As you prepare to drift into rest, remember that these ancient teachings haven't shown you a complex philosophy, but a natural way of being that feels like coming home to yourself. In the stillness that's settling over you now, notice how effortlessly your breathing has slowed, how naturally your muscles have released their tension, and how peacefully your mind has begun to quiet. These stories remind us that profound truth isn't hidden in complicated concepts or far-off places. It lives in the simple miracle of this moment, in your breath, in your heartbeat, in the awareness that notices both. Tonight, you've remembered what you already knew, but had perhaps forgotten: that everything you need for peace and understanding is already here. As you carry this gentle wisdom back into your waking life, take with you not just the tales themselves, but the quiet confidence they've awakened, the knowing that no matter what challenges arise, you have access to an unshakable center that no external circumstance can disturb. May this understanding be your companion through all of life's changes, offering you clarity in confusion and rest in the midst of movement. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.